I walked through the front door of my son's house on my 58th birthday with a black eye that had turned the entire left side of my face into a canvas of purple and yellow bruises, my cheekbones swollen so badly I could barely see out of that eye. And before I could even set down the grocery bags I'd brought for the family dinner Michael had insisted we have, though I'd told him 3 times I wasn't feeling up to it, my 32-year-old son looked at his wife Victoria standing beside him in their granite-countered kitchen, wearing designer jeans and a smile that could freeze water, then turned to me with something that might have been pride or might have been warning in his voice, and announced to everyone in that room, "That's my wife right there. She just taught Dad what happens when someone talks too much and disrespects women in this house." And Victoria's smirk widened into something predatory and satisfied, while my younger brother Dennis, who'd arrived early to help set up, stopped dead in his tracks, holding a bottle of wine, his face going from confusion to understanding to rage in the space of 3 seconds. And in that moment, I knew that everything I'd been hiding for the past 14 months since Victoria had first shoved me during an argument about how I'd loaded their dishwasher wrong was about to explode into the open, because Dennis had always been smarter than Michael, had always seen through bullshit faster than anyone I knew, and the look on his face said he'd just figured out something that was going to burn this whole carefully constructed lie of a happy family dinner straight to the ground. My name is Frank Tillman, I'm 58 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law abused me for over a year with my son's full knowledge and approval, how my brother uncovered the truth they'd been hiding, and how I made them both pay for every bruise, every humiliation, and every moment they'd made me feel like I deserved the violence they inflicted. Let me back up 18 months to when this nightmare began, because you need to understand how a grown man ends up being beaten by his daughter-in-law while his own son watches approvingly. You need to understand how shame and fear and the desperate need to protect your child from his own terrible choices can trap you in a hell you never saw coming. Michael married Victoria 3 years ago after a whirlwind 6-month courtship that should have raised red flags but didn't because I was so relieved he'd found someone after his disaster of a first marriage to Emma, a sweet girl who'd left him after 2 years because, as I'd learned later, Michael had become controlling and verbally abusive. I'd thought he'd learned his lesson. I'd thought Victoria, who was confident and successful as a marketing executive, would be good for him. I was wrong about everything. Victoria came from money. Old Seattle money, the kind that bought respectability and connections. Her father owned commercial real estate throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her mother sat on charity boards and country club committees. They'd raised Victoria to believe she was exceptional, entitled to the best of everything, and utterly convinced that her opinions were facts and her desires were rights. The wedding had been extravagant, paid for by Victoria's parents, held at a waterfront venue with 300 guests I didn't know. My wife Caroline had died 6 years earlier from breast cancer, so I'd walked alone through that celebration, feeling like an outsider at my own son's wedding. Victoria's family had been polite but distant, making it clear through subtle social cues that I was Michael's father, not their equal. After the wedding, Michael and Victoria bought a house in Bellevue, a modern 4-bedroom monstrosity that cost $2 million, mostly financed by Victoria's father as a wedding gift. Michael's job as an IT manager paid well, but not that well. He'd become dependent on Victoria and her family's money within weeks of marriage. That's when the changes started. Michael began canceling our regular Sunday dinners, claiming he and Victoria were busy with house projects or social obligations. When we did meet, Victoria dominated conversations, correcting Michael when he spoke, making decisions about their lives without consulting him, treating him less like a partner and more like an accessory to her lifestyle. I mentioned this to Michael once, carefully, during a rare lunch, just the two of us. "Son, are you happy? You seem different lately, more tense." "I'm fine, Dad. Victoria just has high standards. She's helping me be better." "Better than what?" "Better than I was. More successful, more refined. She comes from a different world than we do. I'm learning from her." "You don't need to change who you are for anyone." "You don't understand. Victoria sees potential in me that I didn't even know I had. She's pushing me to be the man I'm supposed to be." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd been told what to think and had accepted it as truth. I let it go because I didn't want to push him away. The first incident happened 14 months ago. Victoria and Michael had invited me over for dinner to celebrate Michael's birthday. I'd arrived with a gift, a nice watch I'd saved for, and we'd been having what seemed like a pleasant evening until I'd mentioned that I'd run into Emma, Michael's ex-wife, at the grocery store. "She looked good," I'd said, trying to make conversation. "She asked about you, said to tell you she hopes you're happy." Victoria's expression had gone cold. "You shouldn't be talking to that woman. She was toxic for Michael. She's probably trying to worm her way back into his life." "She wasn't trying anything. We just ran into each other. She was being polite." "Polite?" Victoria's voice had taken on an edge. She's manipulative. Michael's told me all about how she used to guilt-trip him and play victim. You defending her is insulting to your son. I'm not defending anyone. I'm just saying she seemed fine and sent good wishes. Well, Michael doesn't want her good wishes. Do you, honey? Michael had looked uncomfortable, but nodded. Yeah, Dad, it's better if we just don't talk about Emma. That part of my life is over. I should have dropped it. But something about Victoria's tone, the way she'd steamrolled over a simple comment, made me push back. I can talk to whoever I want. Emma was family for 2 years. I'm not going to pretend she doesn't exist just because you've decided she's toxic. That's when Victoria had stood up, her face flushed with anger. How dare you disrespect me in my own house? You need to learn some boundaries, Frank. I'm not disrespecting you. You're undermining me. You're taking her side over your son's wife. That's unacceptable. The argument had escalated quickly. I'd raised my voice, which I regretted, saying something about how Victoria didn't get to control who I spoke to or what I said. She'd gotten louder, accusing me of being a terrible father who enabled Michael's ex-wife's manipulation. Michael had sat there frozen, not defending me, not defending Victoria, just looking miserable. Then Victoria had done something I'd never expected. She'd walked over to where I was standing by the kitchen island and shoved me, hard, both hands on my chest. I'd stumbled backward, caught off guard, and slammed into the counter edge, pain radiating through my lower back. Victoria, I'd gasped, more shocked than hurt. Get out of my house, she'd said, her voice low and venomous. Get out and don't come back until you learn to respect me. I'd looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to tell his wife that physical violence was never acceptable. Instead, he'd said quietly, Dad, maybe you should go. We can talk later when everyone's calmed down. The betrayal of that moment had been worse than the shove. I'd left, driven home, sat in my empty house, and cried for the first time since Caroline died. Michael had called the next day. Dad, about last night. Victoria was upset, but you did disrespect her. You need to apologize. I need to apologize? She pushed me. You were yelling. You scared her. She was defending herself. Defending herself from what? From me saying I talked to Emma? That's not a threat, Michael. Look, I know Victoria can be intense, but she loves me and she's protective of our marriage. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to respect that. Are you seriously telling me that I have to apologize to the woman who physically assaulted me? It wasn't assault, Dad. Don't be dramatic. It was a push. You're fine. What if I'd done that to her? Would you be telling her she was fine? Silence. Then, that's different. How is it different? Because you're a man. Men don't get pushed around by women. You're making this into something it's not. The conversation had gone nowhere. I'd refused to apologize, and we hadn't spoken for 3 weeks until Michael had called saying Victoria was willing to forgive me if I promised to respect boundaries in the future. I should have told him to go to hell, should have walked away from both of them. But Michael was my only child, my only family besides Dennis. I couldn't lose him. So I'd swallowed my pride, met with them, and given a vague apology about raising my voice without actually admitting I'd done anything wrong. Victoria had accepted it with a smug smile, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because Victoria had learned something important that night. She could hurt me, and Michael would do nothing. Worse, he'd blame me for provoking her. Over the next year, the incidents became more frequent and more severe. They established a pattern that I came to recognize with sickening familiarity. I'd say, or do, something Victoria deemed unacceptable. She'd react with anger and violence. Michael would watch passively or actively support her, and I'd be blamed for causing the situation. The second incident happened 3 months after the first. I'd been invited to their house for Thanksgiving. Victoria's parents were there too, along with her brother and his wife. The whole day I'd felt like an outsider, sitting at the far end of the table while Victoria's family dominated conversation with inside jokes and references to their wealth and social circle. At one point, Victoria's mother had mentioned they were planning to take Michael and Victoria to Paris for Christmas. "It'll be lovely," she'd said. "Just family." I'd made a comment, trying to be part of the conversation. "That sounds wonderful. Michael's always wanted to see the Louvre." Victoria had cut me off. "How would you know what Michael wants? When's the last time you actually had a meaningful conversation with him that wasn't you judging his choices?" "I'm not judging." "You are. You always do. You didn't approve of me from the beginning. You thought Emma was better for him, even though she was manipulative and toxic. You've never supported our marriage." This was news to me. I'd never said anything negative about their marriage, at least not to Michael. "Victoria, that's not true. I've been nothing but supportive." "Supportive? You undermined me at Michael's birthday. You refuse to accept that I'm his priority now, not you. You're jealous that he's moved on with his life." The entire table had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation. Michael sat frozen, his face red, not saying a word. Victoria's parents looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Her brother smirked like this was entertaining. "I'm not jealous," I'd said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm happy Michael found someone. I just think—" "You think what? That you know better than me how to take care of my husband? You think your opinion matters more than mine?" "I think I'm Michael's father, and I have a right to a relationship with him without being attacked every time I express an opinion." That's when Victoria had thrown her wine glass at me. It happened so fast I didn't have time to react. The glass hit my shoulder, red wine splashing across my shirt and face, the glass itself bouncing off and shattering on the hardwood floor. I sat there dripping with Cabernet, shocked into silence. "Get out," Victoria said. "Get out of my house. You're not welcome here." I'd looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything. His own father had just had a glass thrown at him at the Thanksgiving table. Surely that crossed some line even for him. Michael had stood up slowly. "Dad, I think it's best if you leave. You've upset Victoria and her family. This is supposed to be a nice holiday." Shai threw a glass at me. "You provoked her. You were being argumentative and disrespectful." I said I was happy you found someone. How is that disrespectful? "Your tone was disrespectful. The way you said it implied you were surprised I could find someone good. Victoria picked up on that. So did everyone else." "That's not what I meant. It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is how it made Victoria feel. And she felt attacked. So please, just go. We'll talk later." Victoria's father had spoken up then, his voice cold and authoritative. "Michael is right. I think you should leave. You've caused enough disruption for one evening." I'd stood up, wine-soaked and humiliated, and walked out of that house past Victoria's smirking brother and Michael's empty, ashamed eyes. Driven home alone on Thanksgiving and eaten frozen pizza while my son celebrated with his in-laws who'd watched his father get assaulted and done nothing. Michael had called 2 days later, not to apologize, but to tell me Victoria expected an apology for ruining Thanksgiving. "Are you out of your mind?" I'd said. "She threw a glass at me." "You pushed her to that point. Look, Dad, I know this is hard for you to understand, but Victoria comes from a different world. She has certain expectations about respect and family dynamics. You keep violating those expectations." "I don't care what world she comes from. Violence is violence. She's hit me, pushed me, thrown things at me. This is abuse, Michael." "Don't be ridiculous. Abuse is what men do to women. What Victoria does is set boundaries. You refuse to respect those boundaries, so she has to enforce them. By hitting me? By making sure you understand there are consequences for disrespecting her. Look, if you want to be part of our lives, you need to accept that Victoria is the priority. I love you, Dad, but I love my wife more. If I have to choose, I'll choose her." The words had cut deeper than any physical blow. My own son, choosing a woman who beat me over his own father, justifying that violence as boundary setting. I'd hung up and spent the next week wondering if I was going crazy. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe a push here and a thrown glass there wasn't really abuse, just strong reactions to my apparent inability to behave correctly around Victoria. Then came Christmas, and I realized I wasn't crazy. I was trapped. Christmas had been the breaking point, though I didn't know it at the time. Michael and Victoria returned from Paris and invited me to their house for a gift exchange. I'd bought them thoughtful presents, a nice coffee maker they'd mentioned wanting, a cookbook Victoria had been eyeing. I'd wrapped them carefully, tried to psych myself up to be on my best behavior, to not say anything that could be construed as disrespectful or boundary violating. I'd lasted maybe 40 minutes before everything went wrong. We'd been sitting in their living room, Victoria describing their Paris trip in excruciating detail, the restaurants, the hotels, the shopping. Every story included subtle or not-so-subtle mentions of how much things cost, how exclusive the experiences were, how lucky Michael was to have married into a family that could provide such luxury. I'd been nodding along, making appropriate sounds of interest, keeping my opinions to myself. Then Victoria had showed me photos on her phone, swiping through images of them at the Eiffel Tower, at Notre Dame, at various museums. One photo showed Michael holding shopping bags from what looked like every luxury store in Paris. "Wow," I'd said, trying to sound impressed. "Looks like you guys did some serious shopping." "Victoria's father gave us 10,000 euros to spend," Michael said proudly. "Told us to enjoy ourselves." "That's generous." "It is," Victoria agreed. "My father understands the importance of experiencing the finer things in life, unlike some people who think saving money for a theoretical future is more important than actually living." The comment had been directed at me, obviously. I'd been a saver my whole life, working as an accountant for a mid-size firm, living modestly, building up retirement funds that I'd never gotten to use with Caroline, and now sat in accounts I barely touched because what was the point of saving for a future that felt empty? I'd ignored the jab. Well, I'm glad you had a nice trip. We had an incredible trip, Victoria corrected. Nice doesn't do it justice. It was transformative. Michael saw how the other half lives, and he's finally understanding that he doesn't have to settle for an ordinary middle-class existence just because that's what he grew up with. There's nothing wrong with middle class, I'd said quietly. There's nothing wrong with it if you have no ambition. But Michael has potential. He deserves better than what you provided him growing up. The insult was so blatant I couldn't ignore it. I provided Michael with a stable home, good education, and all the love I could give him. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Look at this house, this life we've built. None of this would have been possible if Michael had stayed in your world of coupon clipping and budget airlines. Victoria, I think, Michael started, but she cut him off. No, Michael. Your father needs to understand that the life you had before me was small and limiting. I've opened doors for you. I've elevated you, and Frank can't seem to accept that. I accept that Michael is happy, I'd said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I just don't think you need to insult the way I raised him to make your point. I'm not insulting. I'm being honest. Your middle-class values held him back. Your fear of spending money, your small-minded view of success, your insistence on playing it safe, all of that would have kept Michael from achieving his full potential. And what is his full potential? To be dependent on your family's money? The words were out before I could stop them. I'd regretted them instantly, seeing Victoria's face go rigid with fury. What did you just say? I'm sorry, that came out wrong. No, say it again. You think Michael is dependent on my family. I just meant that you guys have been very generous, but what? But my husband should be supporting me instead of the other way around? But real men don't accept help from their wives' families? Is that your 1950s mentality showing? That's not what I meant at all. Yes, it is. You're embarrassed that your son married up. You're embarrassed that he's living a better life than you ever provided. You're trying to make him feel guilty about accepting my family's generosity. Victoria, please, I'm not trying to... She'd stood up fast, and I'd flinched, which she'd noticed. Her eyes had lit up with something that looked like pleasure at seeing my fear. You flinched, she said softly. Why did you flinch, Frank? I didn't... Yes, you did. You flinched like you thought I was going to hit you. Why would you think that? Because you've hit me before, I'd thought. Because I've learned that when you get angry, violence follows. But I couldn't say that with Michael sitting right there, watching this entire exchange with growing discomfort, but still not defending me. I didn't mean to, I'd said. You did, and you know what? You should flinch, because I'm tired of your passive-aggressive comments and your judgmental attitude and your inability to just be happy for your son. So yeah, maybe you should be afraid of me. Maybe that fear will finally teach you some respect. Then she'd slapped me, open-handed, across the face, hard enough that my head snapped to the side and my ear rang. I'd stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Michael hadn't moved, hadn't stood up, hadn't told his wife that slapping his father was unacceptable. He'd just sat there with his face pale and his eyes on the floor. Get out, Victoria said, and don't come back until you're ready to apologize for insulting my family and disrespecting my marriage. I'd left. Again. Driven home with my face burning and my mind reeling. Sat in my house alone on Christmas Day and realized that my son was lost to me. That as long as he was married to Victoria and dependent on her family's money, he would choose her over me every time. I'd stopped answering Michael's calls for a month. He'd left voicemails ranging from angry to pleading, but all of them centered on the same theme. I needed to apologize to Victoria. I needed to accept that she was in charge. I needed to respect their marriage, even if I didn't approve of it. I'd finally called him back in February. Son, I need you to understand something. What Victoria is doing to me is abuse. She's hit me, pushed me, thrown things at me. That's not setting boundaries. That's domestic violence. Dad, stop. You're being dramatic again. I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you the truth. Your wife abuses me and you enable it. That's not... Look, Victoria has a temper. I get that, but you provoke her. If you just learned to keep your opinions to yourself when you're in our house, none of this would happen. So it's my fault she hits me? It's your fault you keep pushing her buttons when you know what happens when you do. That's abuse logic, Michael. That's what abusers say. You made me hit you. If you just behaved, I wouldn't have to hurt you. Don't compare my wife to an abuser. She's not some violent criminal. She's a passionate woman who demands respect. There's a difference. There's really not. Yes, there is. And until you see that, we can't have a relationship. I'm choosing my wife, Dad. I have to choose my wife. We'd hung up and I'd cried for the second time since Caroline died, mourning the loss of my son to a woman who'd convinced him that beating his father was acceptable as long as the victim had provoked it. I'd stayed away for months after that, declining invitations to birthday dinners and family events. Michael had sent texts saying Victoria missed me and wanted to reconcile. I'd ignored them all, trying to build a life that didn't include a son who valued his wife's violence over his father's safety. Then my birthday came around, and Michael had called saying he really wanted to see me, that it was important we celebrate together. I'd been weak. I'd missed my son. I'd convinced myself that maybe enough time had passed that things would be different. That's how I'd ended up at Victoria's house with a black eye, listening to my son brag about his wife teaching me a lesson. "What the hell happened to your face?" Dennis asked, setting down the wine bottle and crossing the kitchen in 3 long strides. He was 2 years younger than me, a criminal defense attorney with a sharp eye for bullshit and an intolerance for injustice that had made him successful in his field. "I fell," I said automatically, the lie I'd prepared on the drive over. "Tripped on the sidewalk outside my house. Caught the corner of my porch railing. Stupid." Dennis looked at Michael, then at Victoria, then back at me. "You fell." "Yeah." "And that's why Michael just proudly announced that his wife taught you what happens when you talk too much?" Silence. Victoria's smirk faded slightly. Michael looked trapped. "That was a joke," Michael said quickly. "I was just joking around. Dad did fall. I was making a tasteless joke about it." "Were you?" Dennis said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, it was stupid. I shouldn't have said it." Dennis walked over to me, gently turned my face to the side to examine the bruise. His jaw tightened as he took in the damage. "This wasn't a fall. This is a fist. Someone punched you. Recently. Within the last few hours, based on the swelling." "Dennis, don't—" I started. "Who hit you, Frank?" "I told you. I felt—" "Bullshit. I've seen enough assault victims to know what a punch looks like. Someone hit you hard enough to fracture your orbital bone, possibly. You need to see a doctor. And you need to tell me who did this." Victoria stepped forward, her voice cold. "This is a family matter, Dennis. It doesn't concern you." "Family matter?" Dennis turned to her, his attorney instincts clearly activated. "You just admitted to hitting him. Michael's joke was an admission. So let me be very clear. Assault is assault regardless of the gender of the perpetrator. If you hit my brother, that's a crime." "I didn't admit anything," Victoria said. "Michael made a joke that you're choosing to interpret as something it wasn't. Your brother fell. If he's saying otherwise now, he's lying to cause drama." "Frank, did this woman hit you?" I looked at Michael, who was staring at me with eyes that begged me to lie, to protect Victoria, to keep their secret. I looked at Victoria, whose expression had gone from smug to threatening. I looked at Dennis, who I knew would move heaven and earth to protect me if I just told him the truth. "Yes," I said quietly. "She hit me." "Dad, don't," Michael said, panic rising in his voice. "Don't do this." "How many times has she hit you?" Dennis asked, ignoring Michael. "I don't know. Several times over the past year." "Several times?" Dennis's voice went dangerous. "This has been going on for a year and you didn't tell me?" I was embarrassed. "Embarrassed? Frank, you're a victim of domestic violence. There's nothing to be embarrassed about." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed. "Domestic violence? He's a grown man. I'm a woman half his size. He could stop me any time he wanted. This isn't domestic violence. This is consequences." "Consequences for what?" Dennis asked. "For being disrespectful. For undermining my marriage. For refusing to accept that Michael's loyalty is to me now, not to him." "So you hit him." "I defended my boundaries. There's a difference." "There's really not. You committed assault. Multiple assaults, apparently. And Michael, you've been watching this happen? Allowing it?" "I haven't been allowing anything," Michael said defensively. "Dad provokes Victoria. He knows what buttons to push. If he would just respect our boundaries, none of this would happen." "That's abuse logic," Dennis said flatly. "That's what every abuser says. You made me do it. You provoked me." "I've heard this exact speech from 100 defendants. You know what we call people who use that logic? Criminals." "Victoria's not a criminal," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "She's a woman who repeatedly assaults a man in his late 50s and has convinced her husband that it's acceptable. Yeah, Michael, that makes her a criminal, and it makes you an accessory." "Dennis, please," I said. "I don't want to press charges. I just want this to stop." "It's not going to stop," Dennis said. "You know that, right? Abusers don't stop unless they're forced to. She's going to keep hitting you, and Michael's going to keep enabling her, and eventually she's going to seriously hurt you. You're 58 years old, Frank. What happens when she hits you and you fall wrong and break your hip, or crack your skull, or have a heart attack from the stress? That's not going to happen, Victoria said. You're being dramatic. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, we have a year-long pattern of escalating violence. Started with a push, moved to throwing things, now we're at punching him in the face hard enough to give him a black eye. That's classic escalation. So tell me, Victoria, what comes next? What happens the next time Frank says something you don't like? Nothing happens if he learns to keep his mouth shut. So we're victim blaming now. Cool. Just want to make sure we're all clear on where everyone stands. Dennis pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my face from multiple angles. What are you doing? Victoria asked sharply. Documenting. I'm a lawyer. I document everything. These photos are evidence of assault with a timestamp proving they were taken today in this house with you and Michael present after Michael made a statement indicating you were responsible for the injury. You can't do that. I absolutely can do that, and I'm going to. And then I'm going to take my brother to the hospital to get his injuries documented medically. And then we're going to the police station to file a report. No, I said. Dennis, I don't want to do that. Frank, he's my son. I can't destroy his marriage. I can't send his wife to jail. I just need this to stop. It won't stop unless there are consequences. There will be consequences, Michael said suddenly. I promise, Dad. This stops now. I'll talk to Victoria. We'll work this out. But please don't go to the police. Please don't destroy our lives. Dennis looked at him with disgust. Your life? What about his life? What about the year he spent being beaten by your wife while you did nothing? I'm handling it now. You're not handling shit. You're panicking because someone finally called you out and you realize how bad this looks. But you've been fine with it for a year. You've been actively participating in the abuse by blaming Dad for provoking it. So forgive me if I don't believe anything you say. I love my father, Michael said, and he sounded close to tears now. I never wanted him to get hurt. Then why did you let your wife hit him? Because I thought... I don't know. Victoria made it sound like Dad was the problem, like he was being disrespectful and needed to be taught a lesson. I thought I was supporting my wife. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. Support your wife, yes. Enable her to commit crimes, no. There's a difference, Michael. And you missed it. Victoria's facade finally cracked. Fine. You want the truth? I hit him. Multiple times. And I'd do it again. He's a judgmental, passive-aggressive asshole who undermines my marriage at every opportunity. Someone needed to put him in his place. Michael won't do it, so I did. And there's the confession, Dennis said, his phone still recording. Thank you for that. You're recording me? Victoria's face went pale. Washington is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I'm a party to this conversation, so yes, I'm recording. And I just got you admitting to assault on tape. You son of a bitch! Actually, I'm the victim's brother and a lawyer who's seen enough domestic violence to know it when I see it. And this is textbook. So here's what's going to happen. Frank and I are leaving now. You two can stay here and think about the choices you've made. Tomorrow, Victoria, you're going to have a meeting with my office to discuss a formal apology and a legal settlement that includes monetary compensation for the medical bills, pain, and suffering, and emotional distress you've caused my brother. Or we go to the police and the prosecutor's office and let them handle it. Your choice. I'm not apologizing or paying him anything, Victoria said. He deserved what he got. Then we'll see you in court. Come on, Frank, we're leaving. Dennis took my arm and steered me toward the door. I looked back at Michael, who stood in his kitchen with tears streaming down his face, finally understanding what he'd enabled, understanding that his father had been suffering and he'd done nothing, understanding that his marriage was built on violence and his wife was a criminal who'd convinced him that abuse was boundary setting. Dad, I'm sorry, Michael said. I'm so sorry. I know, I said, but sorry doesn't fix this. We walked out, leaving them standing in their expensive house with their expensive things, built on money from Victoria's family and held together by violence that Michael had enabled because he'd valued his lifestyle over his father's safety. Dennis drove me to the emergency room. The doctor who examined me confirmed Dennis's assessment. Orbital bone fracture, possible concussion, significant soft tissue damage. He asked how it happened. I told him my daughter-in-law had punched me. He looked at Dennis, who nodded confirmation, and the doctor made notes in my chart that would become evidence if needed. We sat in the ER waiting room afterwards, me with ice on my face and Dennis on his phone typing furiously. What are you doing? I asked. Emailing my paralegal. I'm having her draft a civil complaint for assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and loss of consortium. We're suing Victoria for $2 million. Dennis, don't argue with me. You've suffered a year of abuse. You have medical bills, ongoing pain, psychological trauma. She has money. Her family has money. They're going to pay. I don't want their money. You should. You should take every penny you can get. Make them understand that actions have consequences, that you can't beat someone for a year and just walk away. What about Michael? What about him? He's an adult who made choices, bad choices. He enabled abuse. He participated in victim blaming. He prioritized his wife and his lifestyle over your safety. Those choices have consequences too. He's still my son. And he'll still be your son after he learns a very hard lesson about what happens when you let your wife beat your father. Dennis drove me to his house that night. His wife Maria, who'd always been kind to me, made up the guest room and brought me painkillers and sympathy. I always thought something was off about Victoria, she said, but I never imagined this. No one ever imagines their child's spouse is abusing their parent, Dennis said. It's not supposed to happen. Men aren't supposed to be victims. But Frank is a victim, and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Is that necessary? I asked. Making it public? Yes, because Victoria is going to try to spin this. She's going to claim you're lying, that you're senile, that you're trying to destroy her marriage out of jealousy. We need to control the narrative before she does. We need people to know the truth. That night, lying in Dennis's guest room with my face throbbing and my mind racing, I realized Dennis was right. This wasn't going to be fixed quietly. Victoria had committed crimes. Michael had enabled those crimes. And there needed to be consequences, not just for my sake, but for every other victim of domestic violence who was told their abuse didn't count because of their gender or age or relationship to their abuser. I'd spent a year being ashamed, hiding my bruises, making excuses for Victoria. I'd protected her and Michael from consequences because I didn't want to destroy their marriage or make Michael choose between his wife and his father. But he'd already chosen. He'd chosen her every time she hit me, and he did nothing. Every time he blamed me for provoking her. Every time he told me to apologize for being assaulted. So I was done protecting them. Done making excuses. Done suffering in silence. Tomorrow, we were going to war. Dennis filed the civil complaint the next morning. $2 million in damages against Victoria personally and against her father's company as an added defendant, since they'd funded the lifestyle that Victoria had used to control Michael. The complaint was detailed and damning. Specific dates and descriptions of each assault, medical evidence of my injuries, testimony about Michael's complicity and victim blaming, Victoria's recorded confession. Dennis also sent a copy of the complaint to the prosecutor's office with a formal request to investigate domestic violence charges. Washington state had statutes protecting victims regardless of gender, and Dennis made sure to cite every relevant law. They're going to come at you hard, Dennis warned me over breakfast. Victoria's going to hire lawyers who'll try to paint you as a liar or senile or vindictive. They're going to argue that as a man you're too strong to be a victim. They're going to claim you're doing this for money. Let them. I have evidence. You do. Medical records, photos, recorded confession. It's a strong case, but it's still going to be brutal. Are you ready for that? I've been beaten for a year while everyone told me it was my fault. I'm ready for whatever comes next. The response came faster than expected. Victoria's father, Richard Sullivan, called Dennis's office by noon demanding a meeting. Dennis set it for that afternoon at his law office with strict conditions. Lawyers only, everything on the record. No contact between the families. We arrived at Dennis's conference room to find Richard Sullivan with two attorneys, both from a major Seattle firm that Dennis recognized as specializing in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Victoria was not present, probably on her lawyer's advice. Let me be very clear about something, Richard Sullivan began, his voice cold with controlled fury. This is an extortion attempt. Your client is trying to leverage a family disagreement into a multi-million-dollar payday. We're not going to allow that. Interesting characterization, Dennis replied calmly. I'd characterize it differently. Your daughter committed numerous assaults over a year-long period against a man in his late 50s, causing documented injuries, including a fractured orbital bone. My client has medical evidence, photographs, and a recorded confession. That's not extortion. That's accountability. Your so-called evidence is a recording obtained illegally. Washington is a one-party consent state. I was party to the conversation. The recording is completely legal and admissible. Then your client's testimony is unreliable. He's almost 60. He could be confused. He could be fabricating events. He has dated medical records going back 14 months showing injuries consistent with assault. Are you claiming he beat himself up repeatedly just to frame your daughter? The lawyer who'd been speaking, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Peterson, according to her card, shifted tactics. Look, we're prepared to offer a settlement. Mr. Sullivan's family values privacy. $50,000 in exchange for complete non-disclosure and dismissal of all claims. $2 million, Dennis said. That's absurd. Your damages don't come close to justifying 14 months of repeated assaults, medical bills, pain and suffering, intentional infliction of emotional distress, loss of relationship with his son who enabled the abuse. I think $2 million is actually conservative. We'll give you $100,000. Final offer. Not even close. $2 million, or we proceed to trial. And just so you're aware, I've already submitted the case file to the King County Prosecutor's Office for criminal charges. So even if we settle civilly, your daughter is still facing criminal liability. Richard Sullivan's face had gone red with anger. You're destroying my daughter's life over a few arguments that got heated. She beat my brother for over a year. That's not arguments getting heated. That's domestic violence. Frank could have walked away at any time. So we're victim blaming now? Tell me, Mr. Sullivan, if Victoria had been the victim and Frank had been hitting her, would you be saying she could have walked away at any time? Or would you be demanding his arrest? Silence. The hypocrisy was too obvious to deny. This is different, Sullivan started. It's not different, Dennis said firmly. Violence is violence. Your daughter is an abuser. Your son-in-law enabled that abuse. And your money funded the lifestyle that gave them the illusion they were above consequences. Now those consequences are here. Diane Peterson leaned forward. Mr. Tillman, what do you really want here? Do you want money? Do you want revenge? Do you want your son back? Tell us what resolution you're actually seeking. I spoke for the first time since entering the room. I want Victoria to face criminal charges for what she did. I want Michael to understand that he enabled abuse and that has destroyed our relationship. I want everyone to know that domestic violence isn't just men hitting women. It's anyone hitting anyone, and it's always wrong. And yes, I want compensation for the year of pain and medical expenses and trauma I've endured. $2 million is what that's worth to me. And if we pay you $2 million, you'll forget everything? Peterson asked skeptically. No, I'll never forget what they did to me. But I'll sign a settlement agreement that includes non-disclosure if that's what you want. The civil case will go away. But I'm not dropping the criminal complaint. That's between Victoria and the prosecutor's office. Then there's no deal, Sullivan said. We're not paying $2 million if she's still facing criminal charges. Then we'll see you in court, Dennis said, standing. Trial is going to be very public. Media loves these stories. Successful marketing executive abuses her husband's elderly father. Wealthy family tries to cover it up. It's got everything. Domestic violence, gender role reversal, rich people behaving badly. Should be front-page news. You wouldn't dare. Watch me. I've already contacted 3 journalists who cover domestic violence issues. They're very interested in Frank's story, so you have a choice. Settle for $2 million and we keep it quiet. Or fight us and watch your daughter's face become the symbol of domestic violence against men in Washington state. We walked out, leaving them to consider their options. Dennis was grinning. That was fun. Was any of that true about the journalists? Every word. I called them this morning. They're champing at the bit for this story. Rich, educated woman beating her father-in-law with her husband's approval. That's a story that challenges every assumption about domestic violence. They want it. What if they settle? They will. Sullivan's not an idiot. A trial would destroy Victoria's reputation and probably Michael's career too. It would raise questions about Sullivan's company culture and whether they enable violence. And it would cost them way more than $2 million in legal fees fighting a case they'll probably lose. They'll pay. He was right. 3 days later, Diane Peterson called with an offer. $1.5 million. Complete non-disclosure. Frank would sign an affidavit stating he'd been fully compensated for all injuries and would bring no further civil claims. In exchange, the Sullivans would encourage Victoria to take a plea deal on reduced criminal charges that wouldn't involve jail time. Dennis negotiated it up to $1.8 million and better terms on the non-disclosure agreement. I could tell my story, just not mention Victoria or Michael by name. The settlement also included a permanent no-contact order. Victoria could never contact me, come near me, or be in the same space as me without my explicit consent. Take it, Dennis advised. It's a good deal. You get justice, you get compensated, and you never have to see Victoria again. What about Michael? What about him? He's an adult. He made his choices. If he wants a relationship with you, he knows how to apologize. I signed the settlement. $1.8 million deposited into my account. A no-contact order filed with the court. an agreement that closed the civil case and ended my relationship with Victoria permanently. The criminal case took longer. The prosecutor charged Victoria with fourth-degree assault, a misdemeanor despite Dennis's arguments for felony charges based on the pattern of abuse. Victoria's lawyers negotiated a plea deal: 1-year probation, anger management classes, community service, and a permanent notation on her record that would show up on background checks. "It's not enough," Dennis said when we learned the terms. "She should be in jail. She's going to have a criminal record. That's something, and everyone knows what she did now. That's more than I had before." Michael tried to contact me once during the proceedings. He called Dennis's office asking to speak to me. Dennis took the call. "He doesn't want to talk to you," Dennis told him. "He's my father. I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You enabled your wife to abuse him for over a year. You blamed him for the violence. You chose her over him at every opportunity. What explanation could possibly justify that?" "I was wrong. I know that now. I want to make it right." "Then get divorced. Leave Victoria. Show your father through actions that you've actually learned something. Until then, leave him alone." Michael apparently didn't take that advice. He sent letters to Dennis's office that Dennis screened but didn't give me. He tried to approach me once at a grocery store. I walked away without acknowledging him. He called from different numbers that I blocked. 6 months after the settlement, Dennis showed me one of Michael's letters. "I think you should read this one." The letter was 4 pages, handwritten, detailed. Michael described how the settlement had destroyed his marriage. Victoria blamed him for not protecting her better, for not stopping me from filing charges. They'd fought constantly. She'd become verbally abusive to him, something he hadn't noticed before because it had been normal to him. He'd finally understood what I'd been experiencing because he'd experienced it himself. "I filed for divorce 3 months ago," the letter read. "Victoria fought it, but I didn't back down. I moved out, got my own apartment, started therapy. My therapist helped me see that I was in an abusive relationship too, that Victoria had been controlling and manipulative from the beginning. I was just too caught up in the money and status to see it. I know I enabled her to hurt you. I know I chose wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." I read it 3 times, felt something crack in my chest that had been frozen for months. "Do you want to see him?" Dennis asked. "I don't know. He's your son. He chose her over me. And now he's unchosen her. Now he's understanding what you went through. That's growth. That's change. Not saying you have to forgive him, but maybe consider talking to him." I thought about it for a week. Finally called the number on Michael's letter. He answered on the second ring. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Oh, God. I'm so glad you called. I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't." "I understand. What I did, there's no excuse. I was a coward, and I was wrong. You were. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I've left Victoria. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand how I let things get so bad. And I miss you. I miss my father. I missed you too. For over a year I missed you while you stood by and let your wife beat me. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." "Why did you do it? Why did you enable her?" Silence for a long moment. Then, "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I couldn't support her on my own salary. Ashamed that I needed her family's money. Ashamed that she was more successful than me. So when she got angry at you for pointing that out, even indirectly, I sided with her because siding with her meant I didn't have to face my own inadequacy. That's not an excuse. I know, it's just the truth. I was weak and I was scared of losing her in the lifestyle. So I sacrificed you. I convinced myself you were the problem because that was easier than admitting my wife was abusive and I was enabling it. What changed? You standing up for yourself, the lawsuit, seeing Dad actually fight back instead of taking it, and then Victoria turning on me once you weren't available to abuse anymore. I got a taste of what you'd been experiencing, and I finally understood. So you only learned not to enable abuse when you became the victim yourself? Yeah, I'm not proud of that. But it's true. I'm sorry I wasn't smarter sooner. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when I should have. I'm sorry I was such a terrible son." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of a year of pain and months of anger, and underneath it all, the truth that Michael was still my son. Still the boy I'd raised, who'd made terrible mistakes, but was trying to learn from them. "I'm not ready to have a relationship with you yet," I said finally, "but I'm willing to try, slowly, carefully, with a lot of therapy involved. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'll do it." "Why did you call Dennis your office and try so hard to reach me?" Because I realized I'd lost my father and it was my own fault. Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life knowing I'd chosen wrong and never tried to fix it. Because you deserve better than what I gave you, and I wanted the chance to try to be better. You hurt me more than Victoria did, because she was just a terrible person. But you were my son. You were supposed to protect me, and you did the opposite. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you give me the chance. I thought about Caroline, who'd always believed in second chances, who'd always said that family meant forgiving each other's mistakes even when it was hard, who would have wanted me to try to rebuild my relationship with our son. Okay, I said, we can try. But Michael, if you ever enable anyone to hurt me again, if you ever choose a partner over me like that again, we're done. Forever. You understand? I understand, and I promise I'm not that person anymore. I'm learning to be the son you deserved all along. We met for coffee a week later. It was awkward and painful, but it was a start. Michael looked different. Thinner, older, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The divorce and loss of his lifestyle had aged him. I'm living in a studio apartment in Renton, he said, making payments on credit card debt from the marriage. Victoria got the house because her father had put the down payment. I'm basically starting over at 32. How's that feel? Scary, but honest. For the first time in 3 years, I'm not dependent on anyone. I'm not living beyond my means. I'm just Michael, trying to figure out who I am without money or status or a wife telling me who to be. That's good. It is. I mean, it sucks financially. But it's good for my soul or whatever. My therapist says I need to learn to be comfortable with myself before I can be with anyone else. She's probably right. We talked for an hour. It wasn't reconciliation. There was too much hurt for that. But it was a beginning. A tentative, fragile beginning of possibly rebuilding something that had been destroyed. Over the next 6 months, Michael and I met regularly. Coffee, lunch, eventually dinner. We talked about his therapy and my recovery, about his divorce and my settlement, about Victoria, who'd apparently moved to California after the criminal case concluded, unable to face the gossip and judgment in Seattle. Her parents disowned her, Michael said one night over dinner. Said she'd embarrassed them and violated their values, cut her off financially. She's living with some guy she met online, apparently, working a regular job for the first time in her life. How do you feel about that? I don't feel much of anything. She's a stranger to me now. I can't believe I was married to her. Can't believe I let her convince me that abusing you was acceptable. You were manipulated too. That doesn't excuse what I did. I was an adult making choices, bad choices. I own that. I appreciate that. Do you think you'll ever really forgive me? I thought about it honestly. I don't know. I'm trying. But every time I look in the mirror and see the scar from where Victoria hit me hard enough to fracture my orbital bone, I remember that you stood there and did nothing, that you blamed me, that you chose her. That's hard to forgive. I understand. I'll keep trying to earn it anyway. A year after the settlement, I used some of the money to fulfill a dream Caroline and I had shared, traveling through Europe. Dennis came with me, and we spent 6 weeks seeing museums and historical sites and eating good food. It was healing in ways I hadn't expected, putting physical distance between myself and the trauma, experiencing joy and beauty after a year of pain and ugliness. Michael called while I was in Rome. Hey, Dad, just wanted to check in. How's the trip? Amazing. You'd love it here. Maybe someday we can come together, when things are better between us. Maybe. Michael, can I ask you something? Anything. That night at your birthday party, before everything happened with Dennis, what were you feeling when Victoria hit me and you bragged about it? Silence for a long moment. Honestly, I was feeling powerful, like I'd finally found someone who was on my side completely, who would protect our marriage from anyone, even my own father. I thought that's what partnership was supposed to be. Total loyalty, no matter what. I was proud that Victoria was strong enough to enforce boundaries I was too weak to enforce myself. You thought me being beaten was strength? I thought it was Victoria being passionate and protective. I didn't see it as violence. I saw it as her caring so much about our marriage that she was willing to fight for it. That's what she'd convinced me it was. Now I know it was just abuse. But in that moment, I believed her narrative completely. That's terrifying. It is. That's how manipulation works, though, right? She'd spent 3 years telling me that anyone who questioned her was disrespecting me, that defending her meant defending myself, that your presence in our lives was a threat to our marriage. By the time she hit you, I'd been so conditioned to see you as the enemy that I didn't even recognize what was happening was wrong. How did Dennis figure it out so fast? Because he wasn't emotionally invested. He could see the situation objectively. He saw a woman hitting a man and a son enabling it. No complicated emotions or manipulation clouding his judgment, just facts. Thank God for Dennis. Yeah, he saved you. He saved both of us, actually. If he hadn't intervened that night, I'd probably still be married to Victoria, still enabling her, still believing the lies. When I returned from Europe, Michael and I started having regular family dinners at Dennis and Maria's house. It felt safer there, with witnesses and mediators, less pressure to perform reconciliation we weren't ready for. Slowly, over months, the relationship began to heal. 2 years after the settlement, Michael started dating again. A woman named Rachel, who worked as a teacher, made her own money, and had no interest in controlling or manipulating him. He was cautious, introducing us only after they'd been dating 6 months, clearly terrified of making the same mistakes. Rachel was lovely, kind, intelligent, independent. Nothing like Victoria. When Michael told her about what had happened with Victoria and me, Rachel's response was immediate. Your father didn't deserve that. I'm so sorry you both went through it. No excuses. No victim blaming. Just acknowledgement of pain and sympathy. It was refreshing. 3 years after the settlement, Michael proposed to Rachel. She said yes. He called me immediately. I want you to walk me down the aisle, he said. I know that's weird since I'm the groom, but I want you there beside me. Want everyone to know you're important to me. That I'm not ashamed of our history. That we came through hell and survived. That's not traditional. Nothing about our relationship is traditional anymore. We built something new from the ashes. I want to honor that. I stood beside my son at his wedding, watching him marry a woman who treated him with respect and kindness. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that he'd actually learned from his mistakes. Hope that he'd become the man Caroline and I had tried to raise. Hope that maybe, eventually, we'd have a relationship that wasn't defined by trauma. Victoria's name never came up at the wedding. She was a ghost, an unpleasant memory, a lesson learned. But she'd given me one gift, intentional or not. She'd shown me that abuse is abuse regardless of gender, that violence can come from unexpected sources, and that standing up for yourself is always right even when everyone tells you you're wrong. 4 years after the settlement, I stood in my new condo, purchased with settlement money, and looked at a photo of Michael, Rachel, and their newborn daughter, Caroline, named after her grandmother. Dennis was in the photo too, along with Maria. My family, rebuilt from pieces that had been shattered. The scars from Victoria's abuse were still there. Physical scars on my face from the orbital fracture. Emotional scars from a year of violence and betrayal. Relational scars with Michael that would never fully heal. But I'd survived. I'd fought back. I'd made them pay for what they did, and I'd rebuilt a life that was honest and good, surrounded by people who valued me instead of using me as a punching bag. That was the revenge that mattered, not Victoria's criminal record or the settlement money or her ruined reputation. The revenge was that I'd thrived while she'd fallen. I'd healed while she'd lost everything. I'd rebuilt my relationship with my son while she'd been disowned by her family. The revenge was that I'd won by refusing to be a victim anymore, by standing up and fighting back and demanding accountability. The revenge was that violence hadn't broken me. It had made me stronger, smarter, and absolutely unwilling to ever accept abuse again. And standing in my condo, looking at that photo of my family rebuilt, I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you survived hell and came out the other side intact. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself when everyone said you were wrong. The kind of peace that comes from justice, healing, and the knowledge that you're stronger than anyone who tried to destroy you. That was enough.